Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of Thrive Live. I am really excited about today's topic because I think the pelvic floor is very important for our health as women specifically. And so I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Olivia Stanzer. She is a physical therapist, healer, and empowerment coach, having trained as a doctor of physical therapy, specializing in the pelvic floor, prenatal yoga, women's health and nutrition, and in Reiki. She feels that her life purpose is to guide women in reconnecting back into their bodies and intuition via pelvic floor work, mindset work, breath work, and healing their physical and emotional bodies, which is perfect alignment with what we are all trying to do in Thrive Live. And Dr. Liv works at, I met her out here in Colorado Springs, but she also works via telemedicine and remotely. And so she is a wonderful provider. So without further ado, Dr. Liv, you can have the floor per se.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and to dive deep into the pelvic floor with you today. It's something that I'm very, very passionate about. I've centered my entire work around it. And I'm really passionate about it because I've seen the major transformations that happen in the women that I work with. And I've taken myself through all this work myself. I always joke that I'm always my first patient with everything that I do. So I've felt the transformation in myself as well. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview. There's a lot that goes on in the pelvic floor, as you'll probably learn today. So a little bit of a preview on the physical and the energetic properties of the pelvic floor. And the pelvic floor it's still a bit of a taboo topic. It's still a little bit scandalous. I think within the prenatal postpartum circles, we tend to talk about it a little bit more because you get into some of that incontinence. It's a little bit more okay to talk about, but there's actually a lot more that goes on than just incontinence when you've had a baby. The pelvic floor affects a lot of different things, and many women are actually walking around without realizing that pelvic floor work can help them because we've become very disconnected from that area. And I'll dive in a little bit more in that in a minute on why we've become disconnected from that area. But a couple things that you might not attribute to the pelvic floor specifically or think about going to see a pelvic floor therapist is unresolved back or hip pain. So back or hip pain that you've tried treating with other methods. You've already gone to PT, not specifically pelvic floor PT, chiropractors, and it's just not healing. Difficulty with orgasm, discomfort with sex, painful period cramps. That's one of those where in the pelvic floor world, we talk a lot about things that are common but not normal. So for some reason, we've all decided that when you have your period, you're supposed to be in pain, which is common for many women, but it's not actually normal, and your body's not meant to be in pain every single month. And I've actually even had women that have come in with knee pain that just won't go away, and it was because of the pelvic floor. So you can walk around not realizing that you need pelvic floor work, and I would venture to say that most women could probably benefit from pelvic floor work. But before we dive too deep into the pelvic floor, I did want to show you exactly what the pelvic floor is, because we hear the word, we don't always quite know what it is. So I brought my little model because this guy or this woman comes with me everywhere. But our pelvic floor is actually this bowl. So in the pelvic floor world, we called the pelvic bowl quite a bit because it's a little bowl of muscles, and it goes from hip to hip and then from the front of your body to the back of your body. So it's at the bottom of your body, the seat of your body, and really encompasses every part of your body here. And then inside the bowl are your digestive organs, your sexual organs, nerves that, amongst many other things, also help give you all of those good sensations, your vascular and lymphatic structures that nourish all of these. So your pelvic floor muscles, that bowl, actually supports all of that, all those organs and tissues and structures. And we sometimes refer to this as a hammock because the pelvic floor muscles holds everything else up. So this is where sometimes you may have heard of a prolapse, and that's because those pelvic floor muscles aren't working the way that they're supposed to, and so they're not able to hold up those structures. And we tend to think of pelvic floor muscles as this like mysterious part of our body, but it's actually just like every other muscle in our body, and that it can get tight and tense. You can strain, overwork, strengthen, or weaken these muscles. So at the core of it, the pelvic floor muscles work like every other muscle in your body. And so in the same way, you want to be able to connect with those muscles. You want to be able to work them, make sure that they're working efficiently and functioning in the way that you want them to function. When we talk about the pelvic floor, we also want to mention the core and the diaphragm because all of it works together. So we've got the pelvic floor muscles, and then you've got your core that comes above it, and then your diaphragms, your lungs on top of that. And they all work together because when you inhale, everything expands. So your lungs inhale, and then your pelvic floor actually moves down to help support that air that's coming in. When we exhale, everything compresses and comes out. So you know that when you're breathing, your pelvic floor actually moves with it, which is really fun. If you think about it, how much you can control and how connected your body is just with your breath. But because of this, even our posture affects our pelvic floor. So especially in this year where we're doing a lot of working from home, we're doing a lot of Zoom meetings and spending time on computers, we tend to come over into that slouch position. So if you think about it, if you're in that slouch position, your lungs are compressed, your core is compressed, and so it adds pressure on your pelvic floor. Whereas if you've got this nice, beautiful posture, you're sitting upright, everything's able to move and expand in the way that you want it to. So we see this a lot physically with, again, that computer time, but then also if you start playing around with the emotions of it too, if you're scared, anxious, you tend to come over into that slouch posture as well. If you're insecure, right? Like if you're not feeling very confident, you tend to kind of slouch over, you try to hide yourself. So again, we can kind of see how those emotions start to play with the pelvic floor muscles as well. And I'm going to touch on hormones just a bit, just to note that they do affect the muscles, but Dr. Jenny is much more of an expert in this than I am. So we'll touch on those really briefly, but your hormones can affect the pelvic floor muscles as well. We see this most evidently during menopause because you have decreased estrogen, which decreases the elasticity of the pelvic floor muscles. So that's where we tend to see a lot of that incontinence, so leaking tends to happen more post-menopause because those pelvic floor muscles are just not able to work quite as well. So that's when we see it most commonly, or we talk about it most commonly, but this also actually happens to a little bit of a degree right before your period because again, estrogen levels are lower. And so we tend to lose a little bit of that elasticity of the pelvic floor muscles, which then always kind of brings up some other things as well. You might notice more symptoms. And then it's important to note if you do have a hormonal imbalance, which that's again, Jenny's masterpiece there. But we do, a lot of us walk around with a hormonal imbalance. So that's going to affect your pelvic floor muscles in a different way as well. So that's just kind of a brief overview on the pelvic floor, the physical properties of it. But where my passion really lies and where my work has kind of naturally moved into is the energetic and emotional properties of the pelvic floor. Because as I was working with patients, I was noticing that even though we were working very much on just the physical properties, women would come see me with endometriosis, other forms of pelvic pain, incontinence. But what I would notice is that a lot of emotions would come up and women would start to become more confident, more sure of themselves, kind of tune more into their intuition, which they don't teach you in grad school, at least not in PT school. But luckily, I think as a yoga teacher, I was able to dive into a little bit more of that. And just honestly, for myself, it was something that I really wanted to dive into too, because I was very curious about what was going on. And there's a few things that I found. First, energetically, the pelvic floor is connected to both the root and sacral chakra. So if you're familiar with the chakras, there's several different chakras kind of coming from lower body up towards the top of your head and actually even above your head. The root and sacral chakras are your first and your second chakras. And these energetic centers are considered more of the foundational. It's it kind of, when you're thinking about building a house, you want that like nice strong foundation, and then you can build up off of that. So your root and sacral chakras are your energetic centers that relate to your feelings of safety and security, as well as your creativity, your sexuality, and your sense of self-worth. The root chakra is the first and foundation of the 7 chakras. When in balance, this chakra helps you move through day-to-day tasks, feeling safe, confident, and positive. The sacral chakra is the second chakra above the root. So your root is kind of the more bottom, and then sacral chakra is more at the top here, kind of lower abdominal area. So it's right above the root, and it is associated with pleasure and passion. And when we think about pleasure and passion, we think about it kind of, that first thought for most of us is more like in a sexual sense. But pleasure and passion is also the things that you do in your daily life, like taking pleasure in your cup of tea in the morning, taking pleasure in a walk in warm sunshine and that warmth on your arms. Those are all ways that we can appreciate pleasure. So it also contributes to our emotions, our sensuality, and our sense of intimacy with others. When these energy centers are blocked or out of balance, physical and emotional issues may arise. This can include problems with the digestive and reproductive organs. It may also manifest as anxiety, fear, feeling overwhelmed, numbed out, or feeling stuck in life. So both of these chakras are very important when it comes to how you feel and also how you relate to the world around you. The second part that I found is also we hold a lot of shame, trauma, and society's expectations within our pelvic floors. Dr. Jenny and I were actually just talking about this before, just the trauma that women sometimes have with birth. It can be a traumatic experience for some women, and there's not a ton of time to process those emotions. So they get compartmentalized somewhere, usually within our pelvic floors. But it even starts during puberty, preteen, teenage years. Many of us have had experiences growing up where we maybe felt ashamed or confused about our periods, confusions about putting in tampons, mixed messages from society about having sex. There's just a lot of, in those years, there's a lot of messages that we get about what's okay, what's not okay. information that we maybe don't receive. I've had quite a few women who've come to me, and during our discussion, it comes up that at their first period, they thought they were bleeding to death because nobody had told them about their period. Which, if you think about it, is a very traumatic experience to realize that you're not actually bleeding to death. It's just this part of your body or this process that's happening that nobody thought that you should know about. So I found that society puts a ton of pressure and secrecy on this area. And the reality is the pelvic floor is just a tip of the pressure society puts on women as a whole. So diving even deeper into things that we might feel today, in conversations that I've had with women, they've had moments where they've felt like they've had to monitor their behavior at work because they thought they wouldn't be taken seriously enough by their male counterparts. They've changed their outfit before leaving the house because they thought people might judge them. I've definitely done that. I've definitely looked at my husband and been like, I really like this outfit, but is it okay to wear? So there's a lot of these little thoughts and kind of distrust in our intuition that we get throughout the day, because society's kind of put that onto us. And I'm sure there are many other instances that you can think of where you made yourself abandon who you were and what you wanted to do so that you could fit into society's tiny little boxes. And that's where we get that approval from. And there's just so much of what we do in our lives that's a direct result of what we think others expect from us. And those expectations are placed on our pelvic floors and the root of who we are. So we put a lot of shame into that area. We tend to compartmentalize in our bodies these thoughts and parts of us that we start to hide. And then physically, if you think about stress, when we're stressed, we've all kind of heard about like that, holding your stress in your shoulders, right? Like sometimes call them the shoulder earrings, where everything tenses up. But we actually hold that stress in our pelvic floors as well. So if you go back to those scenarios that we just talked about, if you're thinking about the different stresses that we have throughout our daily lives, ignoring even just 2020's crazy stressful life, but just our daily stresses that we have, the responsibilities, those thoughts of, if I speak up, will my male counterparts think I'm aggressive, or, just the different messaging that we put in. So we hold that stress, we hold it sometimes in our shoulders, but we can also hold it in our pelvic floors. So if you've ever heard of like clenching your butt cheeks, sometimes that tends to be a little bit more of a common term that we hear, but those butt cheeks don't clench by themselves because they're back here and they cover those pelvic floor muscles, right? So when all of this clenches up and we're just like muscling through life and holding our stress, those pelvic floor muscles contract and they stay contracted right there with them. So I would actually encourage you to check in throughout the day and notice if your shoulders are up by your ears, if you're clenching your pelvic floor muscles, or even just taking shallow breaths, coming back to that, the way the breath affects your pelvic floor muscles. If you're in kind of more of a survival mode, more of a fight or flight mode, we're taking more shallow breaths, we're not breathing from our bellies. Start being aware of how your body is responding to your daily life. And then realize that all of that affects how we feel physically and energetically and how we connect into that pelvic floor. And the nice thing about checking in throughout the day is that as you start to create awareness about how you're connecting to your body, how your body is being affected by the stress of daily life, that's where you start to get to change how you're being affected. Awareness allows us to notice and then change those habits, change those neural pathways to start to create new neural pathways in order to calm down the nervous system, make different choices, and allow us to relax. And the reason we want to relax and let everything go is because we, first of all, don't want to compartmentalize emotions, because at some point those emotions are going to come out in one form or another. But it's also, if you're just walking around all tensed up, you're just not able to function the way that you're supposed to. And we see that physically within the pelvic floor, in that a lot of times when we talk about the pelvic floor, again, we talk about incontinence. And the first thought for most is that that means the pelvic floor muscles are weak. And so we think about Kegels. That's a more of a common word that you tend to hear thrown out. You just Kegel everything away, which is just a strengthening of the pelvic floor muscles. You contract, but if those muscles are already tight because of all the stresses and everything that we're putting on it, all that does is we're trying to muscle through life and through the working of the muscle, and just makes it tighter, which just makes everything worse. So I think that's kind of how we tend to do life in general a little bit. We try to muscle through life instead of easing our way into. I know I'm guilty of that. I have definitely spent, most of us are. We're taught to just like push through, get things done, rather than learning to gently ease into our roots. So one of the first things I almost always teach is being able to relax into your muscles, into your pelvic floor, so that you can ease into the function of it. I would love to, I'm watching the time over here. I would love to share with you a couple of my favorite ways to allow you to start tuning into your pelvic floor, into that womb space. One of my favorite ones is breath work. It's incredibly powerful because we do, again, breath is very connected to our pelvic floor. So remember, the pelvic bowl moves with our lungs. So by breathing in specific ways, we can start to create movement and allow fresh circulation into that area. And there's quite a few different ways that you can practice breath work, but one of my favorites is triactive breath, which is 2 breaths in, coming from your lower belly. So again, from that pelvic floor area, and then 1 breath out, all through your mouth. So what it looks like is so it's very much coming from lower abdominals, moving up with that second breath, and then out through your mouth. And it's a very different way of breathing. It's not something that we usually do in daily life unless we're practicing this, which is nice because it takes you right into your bowl, but it also takes you into your emotions. So with that being said, it is a very powerful breath, and it can feel very scary initially, especially because as you're changing that breath, it can get you into a little bit of fight or flight. So as you're doing this breath, trust yourself. If you need to take a deep, full breath, if it's triggering anxiety, allow a deep, full breath, listen to your body, listen to what your body needs, and trust yourself first and foremost. I would say give yourself at least 7 minutes with the breath to adjust to it and ease your way in. First 7 minutes can be very uncomfortable. But then after 7 minutes, you'll start to kind of ease into that breath. And it sometimes can be very hard to breathe air into the root because we are very numbed out and disassociated from it. And so one of the things that we tend to practice in pelvic floor therapy is allowing tactile cues. So if you're doing that breath and you're noticing you just can't quite come into your pelvic floor area, it can help to put a hand over your vulvar area. So that way you can feel the breath moving through. You've got that tactile cue to signal to your brain where you want that breath to draw from. That being said, because there is a lot of shame and messaging that can be put on women about putting your hands there, notice your emotions, and if it becomes very triggering, allow yourself to back off if you need to. You can always kind of just put your hands over the lower abdominal muscles and allow yourself to ease into putting your hand there if that feels very triggering and very, very scary to you. So never, again, we're not trying to muscle through anything here. Doesn't work very well for life. Definitely does not work very well for the pelvic floor. So allow yourself to ease into all of that. And then I am going to touch on a couple of yoga poses here real quick. And then I know we've maybe jump into some questions here. But my 3 favorite yoga poses that help to allow everything to kind of open up in that area. If you're thinking about the poses, when you think about if you really have to go to the bathroom and you can't get to the bathroom, you cross your legs, right? Like you're trying to constrict everything in. So in that same way, when you're trying to open the pelvic floor and physically and energetically, you're wanting to go in the opposite direction. So all of these yoga poses allow you to open up. So these are great because they physically open up the area by creating space, but it also helps to energetically open up for that connection. So my favorite one is Malasana. It's a deep squat. I brought pictures. Let's see if I can pop this up. I don't know if you can see this. So it's like that deep squat pose. That one's great because again, you're coming into that deep squat, allowing everything to open up. All of these yoga poses are really great to pair with breath, even if it's just taking a nice deep inhale, exhale, because again, it allows everything to open up and move. Child's pose is another one. Let's see where I bookmarked that. So if you're not familiar with the child's pose, that's child's pose. And you want to do the form of child's pose where your legs are kind of more wide open. Again, because you're trying to open up everything. And then the third one is a good old butterfly stretch. So you do this more often as a kid, but just kind of letting your legs pop open to the side. A lot of times those are really tight. Those adductors, so the inner thigh muscles, tend to be pretty tight on women. So it can be kind of an intense stretch for a lot of women. But those would be, just to kind of briefly touch on that, those would be my 3 favorite poses to start to ease into it, and then combining that with breath. But I could talk about this for hours, but I'm not going to not totally overwhelm everyone. But I know we wanted to leave some time open for discussion or any questions that have come up.
So Dr. Liv, I love everything that you've talked about, and a couple points that I wanted to echo too. I mean, everything actually I wanted to echo. I think you're on point with everything. And I think I remember going through pelvic PT, and I think I redubbed the breathing vaginal breathing.
Yep.
And I love that term because it's literally, you're trying to make your vagina breathe. And it just kind of brings awareness to our female essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Breathing is it's incredibly powerful. It's one of the first things I start off with, mostly because we don't know how to breathe in today's society. We know enough to breathe, how to survive, but to take real breaths is kind of a foreign concept for a lot of us. But yeah.
And that whole concept, I can't tell you how I see it through in every single part of medicine of you have to relax first and then strengthen. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's like throwing your head against the wall. It doesn't matter if it's thyroid disease, if it's adrenal dysfunction, we're trying to balance your hormones, improve your sleep, cardiovascular disease. It's that same principle where you have to take a breather and a pause. And, your body wants to heal. It has an innate capacity to heal. And if you just get out of the way, most of the time your body's going to heal once it gets enough nutrients and you've unblocked yourself. then it will heal with the right support. But so oftentimes we're just trying to just push, and I am guilty of that too. And whether it's not just physical, or also if it's just in our work life or parenting or whatever we're doing, just taking a minute to pause.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what we're taught to do, right? And in society is, I mean, just even within our to-do lists, we set up our days and we just boom, boom, boom. We're going through our days. We're just, it's very hard for us to take time for ourselves for that self-care. I'm sure you've coached many of patients through this idea that they need to actually do things for themselves, versus just, take a pill and get on with it. And yeah, kind of allowing yourself to ease into life.
Your life. Yeah. And I've also seen it with so many patients, and myself included, just how you don't really understand what emotions you hold on the pelvic floor until you go through the experience of actually releasing the pelvic floor and training your vagina to breathe. And it does, it brings in more confidence. It's more peace. It's grounding. It's amazing to see kind of the emotional evolution, and like release that happens with learning how to actually release that pelvic floor. I think it took me a month in PT until I finally released it. I was probably one of the longer patients.
That's pretty common though. It is, pelvic floor PT, I think for that reason does take longer, because there are so many emotions stuck within there that it's not as easy as, if you're trying to fix your bicep, you can see it. There's not a ton of emotional attachment to it. It's a lot easier to heal versus this part of your body that holds a lot of that shame, trauma, compartmentalize a lot of our emotions and our identity into that.
Yeah. And it's amazing how you don't even have to have past trauma per se.
Yeah.
And you're still going to be holding so many emotions into the pelvic floor too.
Yeah. And I always make this mistake, but yeah, with trauma, we tend to think of this like big event, which is common for women. But traumas are, these micro traumas where, like my patients who thought they were bleeding to death when they got their period. I have a lot of women actually who, as a child, as you're exploring your body, as a young toddler, sometimes you'll learn that like, touching yourself feels good. And it's not in a sexual manner. It's just as a child, you're figuring out your body, exploring it. But as they're adults in their life, put a lot of shame on them. And lo and behold, 30, 40 years later, they come to see me and they realize that they've held on to this deeply held trauma or micro trauma in their bodies that's affecting their ability to connect to their partners. It's tensed up their pelvic floors. So it's not necessarily this huge traumatic event. It's a lot of the little micro traumas that we tend to have.
Completely agree. Yep. Yeah. And the whole development through adolescence and yeah, there can be so much shame that gets built out of that, depending on what happens socially. Do we have support in our, in our primary unit? Yeah.
And it's, we don't think about it a lot because it is, our primary unit, like, the people in our lives, they're all doing the best that they can to protect, everybody's doing what they feel like they need to do to protect you and raise you in a beautiful way. But it is those little things start to add up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you said another thing earlier that I talk to my women all the time, is that all of our what we think is a normal period. A period should be painful. We should be moody. We should want to, be really irritable and go bite someone's head off. No, none of that's normal. And, it's not normal to have breast tenderness. It's not normal. I don't like that we've created all these symptoms and we think of it as normal.
Mm-hmm.
And a healthy period should be symptom free. And there's so much that goes into that in pelvic floor work as well, but it's kind of moving away from that idea that these symptoms that, any symptom in the body is, oh, that's just a normal symptom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And think nothing about it, where that's your body trying to tell you that something's going on and it's flashing big blinking lights at you. And you're like, no, yeah, that's normal. I expect that to happen. I don't need to address it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much within women's health that at some point we've been told like, oh, either just mask it with, with medication or just accept it and move on. And a lot of times it's not, it can get very complicated, but a lot of times it's trying to figure out, diet and lifestyle changes, your field house on what you can do to listen to your body, connect with it, and figure out what your body's trying to tell you it actually needs.
Yeah. Your body is telling you.
It's speaking very loudly sometimes.
Very loudly. Yeah. And I've referred patients to pelvic PT, not even just for pelvic issues, even for digestive. If we need to bring in a physical therapist to help with the structures of the abdominal organs, because we're working with the SIBO case, or, like you were talking in the beginning, how, the pelvic floor is more than just the pelvic floor. It's this seat of our spine. It's the bowl that our whole spine is coming out of. So if our pelvic floor is off, then a whole alignment's going to be off. What's attaching to our alignments? Organs, tissues, ligaments, everything. And so you can actually affect your digestive output and organ function by working on the pelvic floor. It's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we could talk about the pelvic floor for hours because it is so integral to so much. Yeah. I mean, a lot of like irritable bowel syndrome, things like that start to affect your pelvic floor and vice versa. So yeah, we could go off on that tangent. I could go off on a tangent on the nervous system. There's a lot.
Well, then I want to point something out to listeners. Hold up your little model again. I just wanted to show them like, hey, look, this is where all the sacral nerves are coming out in reference to everything. I want to turn her around. Oh yeah.
Around here. So I have another model that has like the nerves coming out, but yeah, you've got all of your beautiful nerves
coming out there, and that is also helping to set and balance your autonomic nervous system, your fight and flight nervous system. So your pelvic bowl is an integral part in your basic nervous system balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
How stressed we get, how we respond to the stress. It's another physical side to the neurological system.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets pretty complicated down there. Or complex, is probably a better word for that. Yeah, I should have brought I didn't bring my model with the nerves in it, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember going to pelvic PT for the first time. Of course, it was after 2 kids, and I should have gone way before that. But realizing, I was like, okay, we're starting with the Kegels, right? They're like, whoa, you're like 4 months away from that, or 6. And I'm like, what? And it was like 4 to 6 months of literally releasing all these tight muscles throughout the entire pelvic floor, learning how to do a vaginal breath work. And then I was finally allowed to actually do a Kegel.
Yep.
Under supervision.
Yeah. Correctly. And learning how to make sure that you can relax it after a Kegel too, because we learn how to relax the muscles and then we try to do a Kegel, and the body's smart. It's trying to keep you from leaking, right? And so sometimes it'll just get stuck there in that Kegel. So again, coming back to trying to get it to relax after you do the Kegel.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was hard.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard. Yeah.
Vaginal breathing, I think, was the hardest thing out of my year of, and I probably need to go back, but a whole year of pelvic PT, vaginal breath work was the hardest. Because you have to release things that you've been trying to hold together for so long.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and you can't see the muscles, right? Like you can't, again, like you can't see this arm just kind of relax. You can't, it's all trying to feel into those muscles. But if you have become numb and disassociated from that area, you have to first learn how to actually feel into that area before you can feel whether or not you're relaxing those muscles.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Robin, do you have any questions?
No, nothing specific, just learning a lot and relating all this great information to the other things that I do. I mean, I do a lot of Feldenkrais work, and I hadn't realized how much of that has to do with the pelvic floor and the hips. I had a class this morning. We were working on that, noticing where you're clenching and where you're releasing, and letting your breath go deep, and
Yeah.
all of that. So yeah, I don't have any specific questions, but I think the information is great. And it's a good reminder for me not to get too focused on those kegels, which I do a lot. I'm brushing my teeth and doing the kegels, and because I don't want to leak, you know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, it's fear-based, right? Like you're scared of
Absolutely.
embarrassing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love Feldenkrais though. I don't do any of that, but I have a lot of colleagues that have started to incorporate, and there is a beautiful connection with the pelvic floor within that. So I love that you're doing that work.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Liv, anything else you want to talk about before we move on to our patients for the day?
No, I mean there's so much more that we could dive into this, but no, I'm very excited
for round 2 for part 2 of pelvic floor discussion.
There you go. Yeah.
Back.
I would love to. I could talk about this for pretty much forever. My husband knows way more about the pelvic floor than he probably wants to. But no, thank you for having me, and I'm always excited to talk about the pelvic floor.
Yes, thank you so much for coming, and I will send everyone Dr. Liv's website and information. And can you do consultations out of Colorado?
I can do wellness visits. So I do pelvic floor PT specifically. I do in Colorado, but I do wellness visits, consults, and I do energetic womb healing sessions as well. So all of those I do internationally. Yeah. And I actually have a thing launching for next week. That's a little workbook that actually takes you through connecting to your pelvic floor and figuring out what's physically and energetically going on in your pelvic floor. So I'm launching that next week as like a little mini course. So if anybody is interested to know what's going on in that area, that will be available soon.
I love it. Send me the link when you get that, and I will share it. And then I'll definitely share your website with everyone today with the recording. So if there's any questions or they want to connect with you, they can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I love emails, or I'm on Instagram quite a bit too. So messages. It's like I said, I love talking about this. I feel like this is very important work. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but it's been very important work in my life. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, I love talking about this. So definitely reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. Pelvic PT is so vital to what we do. And I love how your real focus that you're coming into is woman empowerment into, your bodies and loving your body. And and that's what we're trying to do a lot through this Thrive Live, plus also educate women. Let's understand the root of your body. Let's understand the root of your symptoms. Let's, from the outside in. And so it just aligns beautifully with what we're trying to do.
Good. Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful weekend. Next week, we won't have Thrive Live because it's Thanksgiving and I'm going to be camping in the middle of the Rocky Mountain National Park. And hopefully my kids don't hate me for that. I don't think it's supposed to snow. Everyone knock on wood for me. Everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving and you can all stay safe.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.